Okay, we're live.
Okay, thanks. Right. Thanks everyone for attending. I'll make a start with the agenda. We've got quite a lot to go through. And just to explain, if I don't see a hand being raised, it's because I'm switching back and forth to papers and the screen, and I'm only on one screen, so I'll try to flip back and forth. So as usual, if you could put your hand up if you need to speak or just shout out, that'll make things go a little bit smoother for us, I think. So with that in mind, is there any apologies for absence?
Councillor Gill-Giles, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. On to item 2 then. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay, so nothing to report there. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting, pages 3 to 8. So just go through it page by page. Councillor Houlihan?
Oh, sorry, it's on page, it's on item 3. I wanted to query something.
All right, okay, yeah.
I specifically asked how long instruments lasted before they were written off, and I was advised 7 years. That's not quite what the minute says.
Can you say what page you're on? Sorry.
I'm on item 3, which is on page 5.
Page 5.
Sorry, the bottom of item 3 is on page 5. This in members asked if the financial responsibility is quantified, particularly for instruments which are not through the location. I specifically asked how long instruments lasted. I was told they were written off after 7 years.
7 years, yeah.
In hindsight, I don't think that's right, because clearly things like double bass, trombones, brass instruments last, well, many years. So I don't know. I think the answer was faulty, but the question, but that was the answer to the question.
Yeah. So can we look into that? Andrew, are you best placed to look into that one and then amend the minutes appropriately?
Yes, Chairman. I'll seek clarification from the manager at the Great Music.
Yeah, because I think what she's referring to there is 7 years being. That's when you have to keep documentation relating to the accounts, etc. But you're not writing off double basses or trombones. If you take that view, we'd be writing off buildings after 7 years, when we so clearly wrong. So if you could amend that, or get somebody to amend that, that'd be great. Anne, can you make a record of that, please?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Going through the rest of the minutes, are there any other amendments? No? Okay. So can we say therefore that, subject to the last comment, that the minutes are therefore agreed? On to the next item, which is the appointment of the chairman. Anne, I think it's best to be, if I pass over to you at this stage, I think.
I do apologise, Chair. I need to. Can I pass this on to Gareth? Apologies, I'm not prepared for this response. I do apologise.
So I think I realised Gareth was on the line. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair. And this is just to confirm the appointment of the chair for another year. It's a formality because, of course, the chair has to be an independent person, and therefore there's only one nomination. But if somebody could formally nominate the chair to continue in that role for the next year, that would be helpful.
Nominate.
Second.
I think in the absence of any dissent, Chair, you've been re-elected unanimously.
Thanks, Gareth, and thanks yet again to the committee for that dubious honour. I'm only kidding, I'm only kidding. No, thanks a lot for that. Okay, so if we go on to the next item then, which is the Treasury Management Paper, item 5.
Afternoon, Chair. That's
that, sorry.
Afternoon, Chair. That's me.
Hi there, Lauren.
Hi. So this report is to inform the Committee of the Treasury Management activities undertaken in the 2021 financial year. This is a backwards-looking report and confirms that the Council follows its strategy of maintaining investments to a minimum rather than taking out any additional long-term borrowing. Table 2, which is on page 18 of the pack, shows a summary of the Treasury Management activities undertaken in 2021. Total borrowing reduced from the 1920 financial year by 13.1 million to 153.2 million, and total investments increased by 12.3 million to 24.8 million. This had the effect of reducing the net borrowing by 25.4 million to 128.4 million. The main reasons for the decrease in the net borrowing was at the end of 2019, at the end of the 1920 financial year, the Council undertook some short-term borrowing at the end of March to support the cash flow, providing grants to businesses in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This was then reimbursed by Welsh Government, and subsequently the borrowing was then repaid in June 2020. The increase in investments is due to having higher levels of cash. During the pandemic, the authority kept higher levels than is usual to cover any unexpected calls on cash. Our borrowing strategy still remains the same. The Council has significant long-term borrowing requirements. The Council's current strategy of funding capital expenditure utilises internal borrowing rather than undertaking new borrowing where it can. The level of internal borrowing currently stands at 107 million as at the end of the 31st of March 21. By using this strategy, the Council can also minimise cash holdings at a time when counterparty risk remains relatively high, especially within the current economic climate. Our investment policy is still to prioritise security, so we currently only invest in very short term and with UK government and local government. It means that we have very low interest rates, but considering the situation, we felt that this was prudent. As part of the MTRP and the 2021 Treasury Management Strategy, it was agreed that the Council will undertake longer and larger investments in riskier financial instruments such as pooled accounts and other investments to generate income. Whilst the Council put in place the necessary procedures in order to start using the pool funds such as CCLCD, following the pandemic, CCLCD actually stopped all new investments for the first few months of the financial year. Due to the market volatility as a result of COVID-19, it was then felt it was not prudent to begin investing in the more riskier instruments, especially as the full impact of COVID-19 was not yet known. However, this will be something that we'll look at to begin in 21-22. So in terms of the impact of COVID on the cash flow, we've had to take no further long-term borrowing in 2021, with the exception of 94k for Salex, which was for a specific energy project and which had zero interest. Newport have received a significant amount of Welsh Government funding to support small and medium-term businesses during the coronavirus, as well as reimbursing increased expenditure through the Hardship Fund and through loss of income claims. Based on the current forecast, there is the potential that additional long-term borrowing will be required in the second half of this financial year. And overall, the Treasury Outturn report confirms that we have remained and maintained with our prudential indicators and the limits that were set. And then I'd just like to say that the PWLB have released new lending terms following the consultation that was held last year. PWLB published a response in November. Interest rates on PWLB loans were reduced, provided that authorities could confirm that they were not involved in debt-free yield activities in the next 2 financial years. In order to be able to access the lower rates, authorities would be required to submit detailed capital expenditure plans with confirmation from the Section 151 officer on the purpose of that capital expenditure. Thank you.
Are there any questions? If I'm Councillor Whitcutt.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, sorry, what is PWLB?
It's the Public Works Loan Board.
Right, okay, thanks very much. Yes.
Councillor Hooleran. You're on mute.
Apologies.
You're on mute again.
Try again. Off. Right, Salex, I note, and I'm pleased that there's 0% interest on it, but there's no notice I can see about payback. It's an energy account, I believe, and is there a paper on when we can expect payback, and in broad terms, what is it being invested in?
So this particular project is being invested in the velodrome lighting. So specifically, this is for a second phase of a project, and this is to replace all the LED lightings within the velodrome in order to make it energy efficient. I think the current payback is expected between 8 and 10 years. I think we've built it in for 10 years. There'll be an additional, so this was phase 1, and the project has spanned 2 financial years, so there'll be further costs in relation to that project in this year.
Yeah, it just seems 10 years is rather a long payback period.
I think the actual payback that they expected is about 8, and that's how long I think the actual lights themselves are expected to last about 10 years, but I can confirm that. Okay,
thank you.
On paragraph 13, Laura, you mentioned there's a capital spend slippage.
Yeah.
Can you just confirm how much that is, please?
It was from between January to March, it was about 7 million.
Okay, so round about 25% of the plan?
20. Yes.
Yeah, so year on year, we're always slipping by 25%, roughly speaking, 25–30%. Just wondering, first of all, why? And secondly, do you effectively take account of that in the strategy or the treasury management plans that you have?
Yes, we do take account of slippage as part of the forecast. So we do assume a level of slippage, and we tend to assume something between 25 and 30% whenever we're doing the forecast. In this particular year, a lot of it is in actually relation to grants that we've received from Welsh Government, and they've actually given us an extension up until the end of April, actually, in order to spend some of our allocations. A lot of what we were finding is by the time we got the allocations, it was quite difficult then to get plans in place and contractors in place as well. The other things that are big on the capital programme are such things as Band B. At the moment, those slippage are fairly minimal, and the cash flows and the forecast that we've received are actually fairly in line now, and that's actually improved year on year as well.
Okay, but year on year, every time we've looked at the accounts, there has been a big slippage. So I'm just wondering whether or not we can perhaps add that to the internal audit plan review later on, because ultimately, if you have a plan for capital and every year there's a slippage, that implies to me poor project management. And therefore, if you're reliant on funds coming in to support the plans, if you was an outside party like Welsh Government, you may think, well, we know you're never going to spend that plan, so why give you the money? So we as the council could end up losing money because we're not very efficient at spending it, if you like. So I appreciate with any procurement, there's always a delay because tendering rules, etc. But that should always be factored into any capital plan, I would suggest.
Okay.
Councillor Houlihan.
Chair, if my memory serves me well, last year, shortfall in some education projects was cited as the reason for the slippage in capital funding. One in particular was High Cross School. So are we saying all the slippage that was attributable to education projects has now been closed out?
There has been some slippage on some of the educations, but the main areas of slippage that we experienced last year, such as Band B, that has been managed more effectively this year.
One last question for me then, Laura. At the moment, you're saying that our net borrowing is around 128 million, something of that ilk. Previously, it's been a lot higher because of Friars Walk, etc. Are we now down to historically relatively low levels of net debt?
I'm afraid I'd have to go back and confirm that. Sorry, Chair. So I'll make sure that I confirm that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Are there any other questions on this paper? No. Okay. So we thanks for that, Laura. The paper's duly noted, and if you could clarify that last query, that'd be great.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If we go on to item 6, which is Audit Committee changes the title in terms of reference. Gareth, is this your paper?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report has already been presented to the Council's Democratic Services Committee. So we're asking Governance and Audit to note the contents of the report and endorse the recommendations that will go to full Council at the end of June to make the constitutional changes to reflect the new legislation that impact on the new Audit and Governance Committee. The changes are set out in the report itself. The Local Government and Elections Wales Act came into effect in January, and that will produce sweeping changes in terms of the Council's internal governance arrangements. And the Act is being implemented on a piecemeal basis between now and next May at the next local elections. Now, the changes in terms of Audit Committee came into effect on the 1st of April, hence the timing of this report. The first change, as you'll see from your agenda today, is the change in title. It's now called the Governance and Audit Committee to reflect your enhanced terms of reference and expanded areas of responsibility. So that's the first change. The second change is to add to your statutory terms of reference under the 2011 measure. So in addition to the existing powers that you've got in terms of internal financial controls and risk management and so on, there are additional responsibilities in terms of complaints handling. So in future, you will be reviewing the Council's ability to handle complaints and to make any recommendations in terms of how those are being handled. And in addition to that, you will have a role in terms of the new performance assessment arrangements going forward under the legislation. So what we've set out in Appendix 2 are the new terms of reference for this committee to incorporate those statutory changes. So that's really there for noting, and Council will be asked to make those constitutional changes at its meeting at the end of June. In addition, obviously, because that changes the roles and responsibilities of individual members of Audit Committee, we've taken the opportunity to update the role descriptions for the Chair of Audit Committee and for the members of Governance and Audit Committees going forward, and they're attached to the report at Appendix 3. And we're also asking Council to attach those to the Constitution going forward to reflect those new roles and responsibilities. So those are the immediate changes that we have to implement. As I say, the complaints handling review will start immediately, so you will get reports in terms of your forward work programme in terms of corporate complaints and how they're being managed. So that will be in the forward work programme from now. The performance assessment, we're still awaiting further guidance from Welsh Government and the WLJ about this, because this will replace the continuous improvement duties under the 2009 measure. And effectively, it provides a self-assessment process. So instead of the current sort of annual report in terms of the annual improvement plan and the audit certificate of compliance that you will get, that will be replaced by a more flexible self-assessment process that will also involve a peer review by an independent panel that the Council will need to establish. So like I say, at the moment, we're really unclear about how that's going to work in detail. We have to produce our first assessment report by 22-23. So I think the view here is that we will be looking until probably deferring this to September 2022 after the next elections before we transition to this new performance assessment arrangement. I think other councils have volunteered to be pilots, Flintshire in particular. So hopefully we will learn from their experiences in terms of that going forward. So at the moment, we can't really explain what role Audit Committee will have in that process because we need more detail really from Welsh Government as to what that will entail. But once that's in force, then Audit Committee will play a role in terms of overseeing that self-assessment process that the council is going through in terms of improving its service delivery. So that's the future, and that's to come. One of the other things that will also come is the change in composition and membership of this committee. Now, at the moment, as we've said earlier, in the appointment of the chair, we have one lay independent member who is the chair of the committee. Now, as from next May, after the next elections, there will be a legal requirement to ensure that at least a third of the committee members are independent members. That's intended to strengthen the external scrutiny of the council's governance and audit arrangements, and to make sure there's a sufficient level of independent challenge on the audit committee. So between now and next May, we will need to go through a recruitment process to recruit additional lay members. And I think it was mentioned earlier, Chair, in terms of your term of office, because you will have served 2 successive terms of office now in terms of council administrations. I'm afraid that will be the end of your term of office, so we will need to recruit a new independent chair as from next May. And Democratic Services were recommending that we start that process now, that we start the process earlier, just to make sure that we go through the same rigorous process that we went through last time in terms of external advertisement and interviews. Because we know from recruitment of other independent members on Standards Committee, for example, that there's a limited market out there, that we're all competing for the same expertise and experience. So the recommendation is that we start that process fairly quickly in readiness for next May. That's all I wanted to say, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Okay, are there any questions on this paper? I just have one question, if I may, Gareth. You clearly outlined the paper, and I can see there's extra work for the committee, which is great, and a bit more powers as well. When I had the training event on this with all the other chairs last year sometime, there was some talk around the requirement of risk and what powers the audit committee or the governance committee would have on risk. So at the moment, the audit committee oversees the risk process, and we're not really part of risk in that sense. And from Newport's point of view, we've done a lot, I think, to improve the risk registers, etc. Can you just confirm that the new Act of Parliament does not bring any new powers as regards risk, so we carry on as is?
Yes, it doesn't change anything in terms of risk. Of course, under the 2011 measure, there are statutory roles and responsibilities for Audit Committee, but the Council has a discretion to provide additional roles. Now, already under that term of reference, there is oversight of the Council's risk management processes. So you're quite right. I mean, that will continue. Governance and audit will continue to have that role in terms of oversight of the process, and being satisfied that the council has got robust measures in place to deal with risk.
Right.
But certainly the identification of corporate risks and dealing with corporate risks remains an issue for Cabinet and Cabinet members.
Okay, thank you. Councillor White, you got your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, how will the lay members be selected, and who will oversee the process of selection? Because there could be a danger that the committee may become politically biased in one direction or another.
Right, what we're suggesting, Chair, is that we follow a similar process as last time, and a similar process to what we follow for independent members of Standards Committee. So the first step is the role description. The role descriptions clearly set out the types of skills and experience that we're looking for in terms of membership of governance and audit committees. So that will be the basis on which applications are being assessed. What we would normally then do is put that out for external advertisement, and against that criteria we'll drop a short list of people that meet the essential criteria. So officers would do the shortlisting in terms of the essential criteria, but we would look for this committee maybe to set up a politically balanced panel, if you like, to consider the applications and to interview the applicants, supported by the likes of Andrew and his colleagues who regularly advise this committee. And those recommendations then would go to full council for appointment and for ratification.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. The next person with a hand up is Rhys Cornwall.
Thanks, Jay. I thought I'd cover off here while Gareth was talking about it. As far as the performance side of it is concerned, as we're working through that over the course of the next few months, I think our intention was to work with the committee on what that's going to look and feel like for the council, rather than present you with the finished product at the end of it. So we're working with WLGA at the moment on how we're going to approach that. We're taking advice from them, and as Gareth said, based on other experiences with other local authorities. But over the next few months, we will be bringing reports for conversation with the committee, really, about the look and feel of it and your role.
Okay, that's great. Councillor Whitcott.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, Gareth covered the point that I wanted to ask in his reply to Richard. Thanks very much.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Are there any other queries? No. Okay. So the paper is duly noted. I think that's all you wanted off us today, Gareth.
Yes, if just to endorse the recommendations from Democratic Services Committee, which are set out in the report, Chair. And
I think, as there's no dissent in voices, I think we can endorse the paper therefore as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. On to item 7 now, corporate risk register. Rhys.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, so we've got Q4 corporate risk register for you today, and as previously said, so the role of the committee is asked to consider the contents of this report and assess the risk management arrangements for the local authority and provide any additional commentary and or recommendations to Cabinet. Just going to give a brief overview of it, and then Paul is going to talk a little bit about some deep dive work that is going to be undertaken based on previous comments from committee. So ending in Q4, we were dealing with 46 risks, including those in the corporate risk register across all service areas, and the details of the numbers of those risks are associated are within the report. 6 service areas risks were closed at the end of the quarter, and they are also in the report. So they are within children's services, city service, education, finance, and RIH. And then changing direction of the corporate risks also within the report. Just to very briefly talk about those. So Brexit, obviously with the arrangements with the trade negotiations with the EU and subsequent impacts of that risk has reduced. In-year financial management, that risk reduced as a result of year-end closing, COVID pandemic. By the end of quarter 4, so the end of March, that risk was receding as a result of the vaccination programme. And obviously we're monitoring that carefully as we move through the following months. Newport Council's property estate, that risk has increased as a result of an issue with St Andrew's Junior School. There are mitigations in place with the service area within education services in order to cover that off. And then out of county placements for education, that risk increased at the end of Q4. I'll just hand over to Paul to talk about some of the work we're now doing with CMT.
Thank you, Rhys. So at the end of Q4 and in previous audit committees, it has been notified, and we've identified that there are a number of risks that have remained at the same score over the last year. In light of all of the risk information, the corporate management team will be taking a more of a proactive and hands-on look at performance and risk going forward over the next financial year and beyond that. As part of the new programme, we will be looking at the most significant risks in the corporate risk register, and the corporate management team will be undertaking deep dive reviews, reviewing those risks and the mitigations behind them to understand why those particular risks are staying quite high and what the service areas and their partners are doing to try and mitigate and reduce those risks in order to achieve the target risk scores that are set in the corporate risk register in the system. In addition to this, as part of good practice from a risk management point of view, the council's corporate management team and cabinet will also be taking a look at the current risk appetite statement that is included in the risk management policy, and they will be considering whether the risk appetite statement needs to change and reflect in terms of the risks faced externally and internally in light of COVID, Brexit and other factors. And then in due course, the next Governance and Audit Committee will receive this risk appetite statement for your comments and any considerations that we then take to Cabinet to approve formally.
Is there anything else, Paul? Or?
No, that's it. I mean, if we welcome any additional questions.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to comment that it was pleasing to see so many risks having fallen until Paul disavowed me of that idea. But, you know, it does look much better. But the out-of-county placement, I didn't quite understand that one, because I was led to understand that we've opened more in city provision for children in care, and yet the risk has gone up.
So the out-of-county placements is in relation to new pieces of legislation around the additional learning needs. And over the last year, due to COVID and the extra requirements in education, there is additional demand being placed to provide specialist and additional support to children and young people in those settings. And due to that demand, they have seen an increase in demand and having to utilise more out-of-county placements in order to support those children and young people in those settings. If the council wishes to have further information, I'm sure education colleagues can provide that.
No, not necessarily, Chair, but I think perhaps the report could make it clear that the reason that the risk has gone up is purely and simply because there's been additional demands placed on the service.
Okay, I think we can note that, can't we?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, because if you read, yeah, that's fine, Councillor. We'll review that, the wording and terminology around that, and I think particularly in reference to it's an early identification risk as well. So it's looking at current capacity and the future risk associated with it as well. So we'll just make sure that is more explicit.
Thank you.
That's great. Councillor White, you got your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wondered, with the property estate risk, to achieve carbon neutral by 2030, how is this going to affect that risk? There's going to be significant investment needed, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to have a go at answering that. So absolutely. So carbon reduction, becoming carbon neutral by 2030 is a huge challenge for us as an organisation, as there is for other public sector bodies. That carbon is spread across a range of activities, partly property related, as that risk is associated. So there's potential for that risk to fluctuate over time, given that. However, quite a lot of that carbon footprint comes from procurement of services. That's quite a big contributor to it. And the other one is then transport as well. So actually it's partially to do with our buildings, but actually a significant proportion of it is to do with procurement and transport activities. But Councillor, you're right. You know, that risk is associated with across our entire estate. When issues such as the one we had with St Andrews arise, it does have an impact on that risk. Whilst that can be mitigated, we need to be mindful of that across our entire estate, and the carbon reduction plans obviously have an impact on that.
Thank you, Rhys.
Just a quick query for myself. It's good to see that corporate management team are taking a bit more ownership of risk, and that has been recognised a bit further up as being a key thing that they need to be owning, which does imply a little bit that perhaps they weren't as heavily involved as they could have been in the past. But that's the past, and it's good that we're going forward into more risk-based approach. So my query then is, on page 49 in the report, we've got 10 red risks, 1 to 10. They're not moving at all, and implies rather that we're not doing much to mitigate these risks. So, you know, as we said before, we don't go through each line, but as an overall group, am I right in thinking that corporate management team will now look to mitigate the risks around these?
I'm sure Paul has got a few things to say about this, but if I start off, Chair, because we've had this conversation quite a few times. I think what I would say, there are lots of things going on to try and mitigate these risks. However, some of them are very, very challenging. I think the conversation we've recently had with CMT around this is to try and unpick, I think pretty much use the same sort of process we do around performance, which is stubborn, challenging performance targets that are important to the organisation, which we are struggling to move, a collective approach to it across CMT about bringing in different views, ideas and resources from other services in order to try and challenge that. So across individual services, we do take the risks incredibly seriously, but now we're putting in place this sort of collaborative process where we can actually draw on resource across the piece. So there are lots of things going on. I think as we move forward over the next few months, when we're looking at how we do manage performance and risk together in the new roles for the Governance and Audit Committee, I think it would be useful to try and unpick some of that stuff. And perhaps, you know, we're looking at some deep dive approaches at CMT within committee, having a bit of more of a dig down into some of these risks and actually what is going on, and actually how we can, you know, how the committee can contribute to some of those things. So, some of these risks, as we previously said, are almost beyond our control. And that really comes back then to the conversation we've had about risk appetite and how we actually determine what our target risk score is. Because sometimes if that risk is that high and we can live with it, then, you know, we sometimes have to just accept that we put in the mitigations that we can, rather than having a target risk score that is totally inappropriate to that.
If we look at social services, go target risk was 6 and currently is 25, and I can't imagine a situation that ever get down to 6 realistically. You know, we don't need to go into detail around it. We've been there a number of times over the years, haven't we? But I totally agree with what you said. Sorry, Paul, I interrupted you there. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, thank you, Chair. It's just to add on to Rhys, having a more of a mature approach is what we're aiming to do as an organisation around how we do undertake risk management, and it is more and more pleasing to see over the last year how CMT have been taking more ownership and responsibility in challenging and providing that feedback to us. So, you know, just to reiterate, Rhys, really, yeah, we're happy to undertake any deep dives, and, you know, if needs be, call in respective risk owners to explain the reasons and the understanding around some of these risks as well.
Okay, that's great. I think it's good to have the paper recognise that. I think it's great that audit committee can see that corporate management team is taking this a bit more seriously now as well. It really underpins what we as a audit committee have been asking for really over the years. So we can have that duly noted. That'd be great. Are there any other queries before we move on? No. So the paper is duly noted. Thanks for your help both on that paper. So if we go to item 8, which is the annual governance statement, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Afternoon, members. This is one of the key documents that I bring to you as members, the annual governance statement for 2021, to give you assurance that there are appropriate controls in place and governance arrangements across the council to ensure that our businesses are appropriate. And before it feeds into the statement of accounts, so there's a requirement to put an annual governance statement together, which comes from the Accounts and Audit Regulations, and this is an early site for members of the Governance and Audit Committee to comment or to shape the annual governance statement based on their knowledge or challenge before we put it into Laura, who's going to complete the statement of accounts. So it is based on the Code of Corporate Governance, which has come through Governance and Audit Committee previously and has subsequently been approved by Cabinet. That is the framework as set out by the CIPFA and Solace publication in terms of good governance in the public sector, and that framework details all the governance arrangements we have in place within the council. This statement picks up on those issues and homes in on the 7 governance principles we have in place, which are listed in paragraph 6 for all members' information, 2 overarching requirements and 5 more detailed requirements, again based on the framework identified by CIPFA and Solace Joint Working Party. The governance statement itself relies on my team to a certain extent and the internal control environment, and that is stated within the report, and that links to the reports that I'll be bringing to committee later this afternoon as well, and hopefully gives members some assurance that we have appropriate internal control arrangements in place for 2021. The intention of the statement then is to home in on what has gone through scrutiny, Cabinet, Audit Committee and Council through the year, demonstrating good governance. We say we have an effective governance arrangements in place, and then because we've given examples within the statement, that clearly demonstrates that that is in place and is live for 2021. It is a very comprehensive document, which, as I said, does feed into the annual statement of accounts. It is draft, so I will be sending it out to various officers for comment as well, and to heads of service, just to make sure that we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. But I don't intend to go through that in much more detail, Chair, and we'll be happy to take questions.
Are there any queries on this paper? I've gone through it line by line. It's broadly similar to last year's, obviously. What I would say is that as a statement, I just feel it's too long these days. I know it's not your fault, Andrew. You're guided by the framework that you have to use, but yeah, I think it just feels too clunky. What I would say, there's a couple of formatting issues there that I won't raise here, but I'm happy to send through separately to you.
Okay.
Two things I would like to raise. So one is there's a little diagram there that doesn't add much value. It's on page what is it? Towards the front, 109, I think it is. Like a little circular thing. Page 107.
Yep.
Doesn't do much for me at all. I think it's way too complicated in a sort of document, and
okay.
Personally, I would take it out. The other one, I would I would mention is on page 116. So you mentioned the monitoring officer has fulfilled the role. I would point out it's not a bread role. It's a role, R-O-L-E. I'm not going to go. I know it's pedantic, but it's quite important, that one. But the final one I would say, though, is that on the very last page, page 121, where's it? Page 131, in the conclusion, I don't think that conclusion is clear enough to say how effective the controls are.
Okay.
So when I'm reading it, it's saying that the coronavirus pandemic did not lead to significant internal control or governance issues. And then the next paragraph, we propose over the coming year to continue to monitor. Now, if we take away there for the coronavirus pandemic, I think this document is trying to say, well, are our controls effective or not? So I would be looking for a statement there that says, yeah, I conclude it's effective. And even within the coronavirus pandemic, it was also held to be effective as well.
Okay.
You can merge two into one or whatever, it might have to have a separate paragraph. But when I read that, it's not clear enough. If I was the accounting officer, I'm not giving enough reassurance. All right.
Okay.
With the other things, I'll email that separately. It's only
if you could share, that would be good. I mean, we could look at the wording on that conclusion. That's not a problem. In terms of the first diagram, that's supposed to link in our values with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. But if it's unclear and that's the consensus opinion that we'll take it out, then we can obviously remove that. And I will sort out the formatting and typos.
That's great. Any other queries, comments, anyone? No? Okay, so if you could note those comments then, Andrew, then
yeah,
that'll be that done.
Thank you, Chairman.
That's great. If we go on to the next item then, which is item 9, Audit Wales Annual Report on Grants. Gareth?
Yes, that's me. Yep, thank you, Chair. And good afternoon, members as well. So this is our certification of grants and returns report for the 2019-20 financial year. So this is our standard report that we bring to committee each year, summarising the work that we've performed over grants and returns that we, as Audit Wales, are responsible for auditing. So the council will receive a number of grants throughout the year, some of which we certify, some of which are certified by internal audit, and some of which are not certified at all or don't require external certification. So this report only focuses on the grants and returns that we as Audit Wales are responsible for certifying. So full details are in the report in terms of the findings and the recommendations that come out of our work this year. So I won't go into them in too much detail, but I'll just give you a brief summary of what the report sets out. So members will note that we've certified far fewer audits this year compared with prior years, and that's as a result of Welsh Government removing the requirement for Audit Wales to externally certify a number of their grants that they issue to local authorities. So the number of grants and returns that we've certified this year is reduced from 10 to 4. And in terms of the types and the level of issues coming out of our certification work this year compared with prior years, there's been no particular change. No new issues or matters of focus arising from our work this year. That said, you'll note in our detailed summary of our findings this year that a number of issues have been raised in the housing benefit subsidy return. We've experienced a number of issues now coming out of this return over the past couple of years. And as a result, you'll see in the recommendations section at the rear of the report that we've raised a number of recommendations for management to consider, principally dealing with the relationship between the housing benefit team who manage housing benefits claims and cases and the housing needs team, who collate a lot of the information that is required to implement those cases. So the detail of those recommendations is set out at the rear of the report for members' information. Management have responded to those and considered those and accepted those recommendations in full. We believe that if those recommendations are successfully implemented in future years, that'll lead to quite a substantial reduction in the cost of audit certification. So members will see that the cost of certifying the housing benefit subsidy return is significantly higher than the other claims and returns that we have to deal with. And it'll also reduce the risk of potential issues coming out of that audit. So you'll note as well in the findings that given the qualification letter that we've issued to the Department of Work and Pensions, depending on the action that they decide to take from that, that could lead to a substantial reduction in the housing benefit subsidy that would be receivable by the council in 2019-20. So in summary, Chair, that's the main findings really of the report. The main matter, I suppose, that I wanted to bring to the committee's attention is that housing benefit subsidy return and the actions that have arisen from our audit work on that return this year. But happy to take any questions that committee members may have.
Thanks, Gareth. Any queries? If I may ask the one then, Gareth, on the housing benefit. That and the teacher's pension, I think, has popped up every year. We've asked for clarification from finance in terms of what action has been taken. And every year it seems that the answer is we'll learn the lessons, we'll do a bit of training. But actually, year on year, nothing does seem to be done. And reading your report, you've emphasised the fact that this is a continuous problem. I'm just wondering what accountancy team or Andrew as internal audit is going to do about this.
Yeah, if I just respond first of all, Chair, I might pass on maybe then to Mark if he'd like to offer a further response then on behalf of the council. But from our perspective, what we've tried to do this year is, I suppose, sort of escalate this to a certain degree in terms of formalising a set of recommendations that can be then used to hold the housing benefit team to account on this return. So what we've been looking to do now in future years is ensure that those recommendations are actioned and taken forward for future years. Taking into account, obviously, we're into the 21-22 financial year. We've still got to audit the 2021 return. But actions can still be taken at this stage before we commence our audit work over the return to correct any issues if they still arise in the 2021 return. So there's still time to correct that position. We'll be looking to work as closely as we can with the council to ensure that those recommendations are actioned, and we'll be keeping in touch with Mark and his team to try and ensure that that's done.
Okay, Mark, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Marion's request of the services in terms of how seriously they take this matter. I mean, it obviously predates my involvement with the council by about 2 years, so my ability to actually do anything about any of the particular entries is probably past by now. I have worked for a number of other councils elsewhere, and it's a common feature in the housing benefit claim that it is a significant claim and it does have large movements to it. That's not to say that the council can't get better in coordinating its housing benefit informations with the housing needs aspect, but I do suspect that given the fact that we are past the end of the financial year now, the ability to fit some of those information needs given the last 12 months of the COVID considerations means that actually there'll be a similar judgment around 2021.
The only point I'd make though, and I recognise the COVID issue, but the fact that it happens elsewhere doesn't make it right. And realistically,
well, it doesn't, and I wasn't suggesting that. I was suggesting it as context that it is quite a complicated and involved claim that involves significant amounts of money, and that actually there are quite widespread movements in every council that I've worked for.
No, I appreciate that, and you know, I've dealt with HRA accounts, for example, so I know some of the forms are very complex, etc. But there's certain things that are popping up year on year with this particular claim. And for example, when you see one of the issues being that the form, not necessarily this one, but the teacher one, is not signed off by the responsible finance officer, you just think, well, this is a basic checklist that you go through. And then from an observer's point of view, you tend to think, how many items are on the housing benefit forms that are the same sort of thing, like a checklist? Now, if there's certain areas that are that complicated that people need training on, fine. But looking at Gareth's report, some of the information is simply not obtained. There's no evidence supporting the numbers in the form. So to me, a lot of this is basic stuff that goes beyond comprehension of a grant form. It's people not getting the right information that is expected. You know, don't get me wrong, there's always a case for human error, and I can appreciate that, but you can minimize that as well. And when you're talking of the amounts of money that we are year on year on this form, I would say there's a bit of a problem in that department. Similarly with the teacher's pension, I know it's not a huge amount in terms of money, but it's a £1 threshold, I think, with that particular form. And I noticed, Reece, you got your hand up. I didn't know if you wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, in relation to the teachers' pensions, obviously it can become incredibly complicated because obviously some head teachers can change teachers' hours, etc. during the course of the year. So it's just trying to keep tabs with that. We had some really useful conversations during the course of this audit with Audit Wales around that. And I think I might have previously talked about the investment we've made in our HR system, so it's totally online. So as part of that, we've purchased the systems within it, which will help us better calculate pensions across the piece. So going forward, we should be in a much better position to alleviate the issues that we've previously had. Okay,
so going back to Gareth's report then, just to wrap this up, can we say therefore that obviously we take the report as is written, but in order to rectify things going forward, that the finance team will look into it, work with the relevant housing benefit team, but also that when we look at the internal audit plan later on in the agenda, perhaps Andrew and his team could also look at what's going on within the housing benefit team as well. Councillor Lorraine?
Nobody's touched on the national non-domestic rates. It seems to be saying that somewhere along the line there was a glitch in the system and it's saved the taxpayer paying out £400,000. Am I reading that right? And obviously it's been going on for some years. Is there any attempt at clawback, and what level of confidence does it give us if a formula error has crept into this system, but our other systems? And you know, a wider point is how we are analysing the formulas that are achieving these numbers. Is it widespread, or is it just related to this one small area, or not so small area of expenditure or income?
Shall I come back on that one, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Just to set out from our view, this is an isolated issue. It's only related to the working papers behind this particular return. Just an unfortunate matter, it seemed, really, in terms of the supporting spreadsheet behind the return, that you know, a row effectively had been missed out. But it's all benefit to the council in this instance, that it reduces the amount that the council needs to pay into the non-domestic rate pool. I'm satisfied that it's isolated purely to that return. It's nothing systemic in that sense that the council has to be concerned about.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further queries, we'll move on. But if we could duly note that finance will work with housing benefit. Councillor Thomas, you got your hand up before we move on. You're on mute. You're on mute.
You excuse me, Chair. Need to go. Can you excuse me, please?
Yes, certainly, no problem at all.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Yeah, so the report is duly noted, and finance will work with the housing benefit team to try to resolve these issues. So if we go on to, thanks Gareth for that. If we go on to the next item, item 11, internal audit, sorry, item 10, internal audit annual report. Andrew?
Thanks, Chairman. This is one of the key documents I bring to the Governance and Audit Committee. It is the annual report, and it's based on two elements. The first, hopefully, will give you as members of Governance and Audit Committee the assurance that we have effective internal controls, governance arrangements, and risk management processes in place within the organisation based on the internal audit work that's undertaken during the year, and also the performance of the team. So it is looking back on what we did in 2021. I have to give an overall opinion based on the work that we've undertaken, and that's set out in the report. And that opinion is reasonable, which means that we have adequately controlled, although the risks identified are there, which may compromise the overall control environment. And we do require improvements, although there is a reasonable level of assurance. So the 2021 audit work and opinion subsequently was based on 6 months worth of audit work due to the COVID pandemic impacting on our ability to undertake our duties in the first half of 2020-21. Team were involved with counter fraud activities due to business grants from the Welsh Government and helped to support TTP. So although Audit Committee previously agreed a plan for 1,200 days approximately, the revised plan was based on 626 days, which was for half the year, which kind of covered the period from September through to the end of March. So the team did a fantastic job getting as many opinion-related jobs out as we possibly could, and I'll come to that in a moment. And that is how we base the opinion on in terms of audit work. We also, for 2020-21, have had to rely on previous year's audit work, where that has also been reasonable, and the knowledge that there has been very few changes, significant changes in either systems or staff changes. So there's consistency across the board. Because we only did a half-year coverage, then I'm saying that because the previous work that we've done gives us assurance, we can rely on that assurance for my opinion. As I said, the second part then relates to the performance of the team, where we hit 78% of our agreed plan against a target of 82%. That was the revised plan based on our half year. I think at the time we put that plan together and brought it in front of Audit Committee, we were quite optimistic in that we were hoping to get back out to schools and other site visits. But as the year progressed and COVID continued, then we were unable to do that, and we had to obtain our source documentation from other sources as opposed to site visits. So that's an overview of what we've done, Chairman. I'll just briefly talk you through the report if I could. In terms of the overall opinion, that's set out on paragraph 4, and is, as I said, based on the work that we've undertaken, based on 6 months' work, and we identified 29 opinions overall to give us the reasonable assurance, and we've relied on our previous audit knowledge and previous work that we've undertaken within the council to identify there's no significant issues. So to compare year on year, paragraph 6 outlines the number of opinions we've issued over the last 4 years, split into the good, reasonable, unsatisfactory, and unsound to give an overall opinion. As you can see, 2021 number of opinions was very close to the number of opinions we issued in 1920, which was for a full year. So the team really concentrated on opinion work to provide the assurance, and we had to prioritize that over the non-opinion work. It's pleasing to note that we've had 5 good opinions during the year, and those are listed at paragraph 11. We've had 23 reasonable opinions. They're listed in the appendix, which I'll come to in a moment. And we've had 1 unsatisfactory opinion, which was Newport City Dogs Home, which has previously been reported into Audit Committee. There's some information around the impact of COVID-19, which I've outlined already, and that the revised plan that Audit Committee agreed was for the 6 months moving forward from September to March. So we've undertaken the work in line with the agreed plan, which Audit Committee was presented with in September. We've also taken on board an additional resource. It's an internal expert provided externally through Southwest Audit Partnership, and we've outlined some of the jobs that they were involved with to enable us to complete the plan and for me to give it the assurance on the opinion. In terms of implementation of agreed management actions, ideally within this report I would normally report on where we are with the 1920 implementation, but because we had not received all responses that we requested by the end of the year, that's ongoing into 21-22, and we'll be reporting that back to committee members later this year. In terms of NFI, we're into another 2-year cycle. We identified the data and uploaded the data in October 20, and we're currently working through the matched feedback we get from the Cabinet Office, and my team are responsible for coordinating that across the whole organisation. So the performance of the team is, as I mentioned, 78% of the plan approved, which is very similar with previous years, and we were still getting draft reports out within 8 days and final reports out within 3 days, which is commendable for the team. I'd like to take members through to the appendix if I could now, Chairman. So the first appendix, Appendix A, which is on page 160, identifies the opinions which we currently use at the conclusion of our audit work, with a definition of the level of assurance that we get from those. And those opinions are based on strengths and weaknesses identified with the control objectives tested. So if your strengths outweigh your weaknesses, then you would generally get a more favourable audit opinion. Appendix B is the same summary as the main report in terms of the numbers of opinions issued and the different types of opinions issued, and then goes into the detail of what work we've actually undertaken, identifying the good, the reasonable, and the unsatisfactory across all service areas of the organisation to demonstrate that we give as much coverage as we possibly can across the board. We've also identified jobs in 2021 which were in the plan but were not completed, and those are listed in Appendix C. And as you'll note, Chairman, quite a few of those are school related, which I mentioned previously. We just could not go out and do the site visits. Appendix D shows the non-opinion work which we've been involved with, mentioned NFI already, National Fraud Initiative, but also the statement I presented earlier, the annual governance statement, financial advice across the board. We provide financial regulations training corporately, and also the follow-up of agreed management actions, just to make sure that what managers are agreeing in our audit reports, they are implementing in due course to make the improvements in the control environment. Moving on then to the performance of the team. This is what I've outlined already, Chairman. The tables in the in Appendix E is for comparison purposes, but you'll note that in 2021 actuals, we've got quite a few non-applicables. Basically, because we were concentrating on getting opinion work out and in draft report format, then we relaxed the requirement for the team to complete detailed timesheets, and that information needs the detailed timesheets in order to compile the performance indicator. But the key aspect is getting as much of the plan done as we possibly could, and the timing of issuing our reports, both draft and final. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Any queries? Councillor Hoolerin? You're on mute again, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, it's really to you. The Dogs Home has come out a couple of times now, and obviously it's a very sensitive issue. Do we need to see them? Find out why they're not closing out there?
Chairman, I don't think so at this stage. They've had one unsatisfactory audit report. It's probably fresh in members' minds because it's been reported previously and in detail. So this annual report is just providing the same information. It is on our plan to go back and revisit in 21-22. If that results in a consecutive unsatisfactory opinion, then I would be advising members to call them in. But at this stage, I don't think we need to call them in, and I would, if members are happy for me to do so, run with our follow-up audit in 21-22 and report it back to committee accordingly.
Fine to accept that advice, Chair.
Thank you.
Are there any other queries before we move on? No? Okay, so the report is duly noted and endorsed. So we're going to item 11, which is the internal audit plan.
Thank you, Chairman. So we've looked backwards, now we're looking forwards to 21-22. This is our plan and bringing to Audit Committee, Governance and Audit Committee for comment and approval, if members are happy to do so. It relates to the work that we are planning to undertake across all service areas. As I mentioned, the objective is to provide you as members of Governance and Audit Committee and the senior managers of the organisation, including CMT, assurance on the adequacy of the internal control environment, governance arrangements and risk management processes that we have in place across the board. We've planned to cover as many service areas as we possibly can, and the plan is based on a full 12 months financial year. The plan is based on productive audit days of 1,084, and the information is probably best described if I go through to the appendix straight away, Chair.
Yeah, certainly.
There's some background information in the report about the structure, about the qualifications of the team, etc., and how our independence is important. But the key really is where we're going to undertake our work to cover the riskier areas. We always start off with a long plan, which basically is our strategic plan over 5 years. We have to prioritise that, and we've taken into account any work that we couldn't do in 2021 and pull that forward and risk assess that as well. We've incorporated schools, so we are being optimistic. I haven't spoken to the Chief Education Officer. We're taking into account issues around the corporate plan, risk register, other corporate documents, and discussions with all heads of service for their comments about where they feel the riskier areas are in their particular service areas and where they would like to have assurance from us directly, in addition to the known audit issues we have as a team. So taking all of that into account, we prioritise our long list into a more reasonable audit programme for the financial year, and then we have to reprioritise that again based on the limited resources we have within the team. So that results in the audit plan, which you have in front of you. Appendix 1 gives an overview per service area of of the number of days we intend spending in those particular areas and the percentage of the total plan, along with the service grouping as well, chief execs, people and place. Moving on to Appendix 2, that's the more detailed plan of what audit jobs we intend undertaking during the year. There'll be an overall service area, a section, and then a job. And then what we've also put in the appendix is when it was last reviewed, which gives us an indication of when we should review it again. The risk we've assigned it, and that's an audit risk in terms of high, medium or low, and the number of days which we intend spending on that particular review. As members can see, that covers all service areas and goes into detail in terms of the individual jobs and sections. And finally gets to page 183. So that outlines the total number of planned audit days we have available, productive audit days. And I've just done a very brief summary then, Chairman, in terms of the total number of jobs in the plan are 82, of which 59 are opinion related. So that'll give us our assurance for next year's opinion. You have 23 non-opinion related works where we're adding value to the organisation. We're giving financial advice to make sure that there are sound financial management practices in place. Many managers across the organisation come to us to make sure that they're on the right tracks in terms of sound financial management. Broken down the number of financial advice jobs, follow-up of agreed management action jobs, and also any finalisation work. So where we had draft reports out in draft at the 31st of March, we have to finalise those and get them to a final report stage in the current financial year. Final appendix then, Chairman, is Appendix 3, which is the internal audit resources. How do we arrive at our 1084? Well, our establishment is 7.5 staff. At the moment, we have 6.5 full-time equivalents. So the total number of days available, working days, is 2,072. We then deduct individuals' leave, an allowance for sickness, training, any management, any management time, any admin that we need to do in terms of the whole team. And that leaves us with a net figure of productive audit days. We've also taken a cut out to that for our special investigations, which leaves us with 934 operational audit days, and the plan is based on that figure. So that's it in a nutshell, Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions about the plan for 21-22.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Any queries on the plan? I've only got the one myself. I mentioned the capital programme slippage earlier, and this happens every year. So I was just wondering, is there possibility that you could review project management around capital plans and capital budgeting? Seems to be a particular weakness within the council.
Okay, that the plan is flexible, so it needs to be flexible to respond to various changes in the year. So we might need to change things around, might need to take a few jobs out and replace them with other jobs as the risk profile changes. That's something I can certainly include, and we would have to look at either undertaking that as unplanned work, so that would come out of our special allocation, or taking another job that's already in the plan out of the plan, particularly in the finance area. So that's something I would need to talk through with Mark and with Marion, but obviously at audit committee's request we can accommodate that.
Thanks, Andrew. Councillor Phil? Are you on mute again? There we are.
Thank you. There are 7 items that are headings that have never been audited. In this time of uncertainty, can they come to the top of the list to ensure that they are audited this upcoming year?
Okay, just give me a sec.
A couple of them are, mental health and children-related things, which perhaps fairly high priority.
Yeah, we will. Thank you, Councillor. We will endeavour to do those first, but we do have to work with the service area and work around their timescales as well. So we've got a draft plan in place. The next stage for us is to discuss that with the heads of service to agree an appropriate time for us to go in and do the audit. So we will be working that through and reporting back in our quarterly reports to Governance and Audit Committee in due course. But I take on board your point, and we will endeavour to move those up our priority list.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other queries, we'll move on to the next item. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
That report is duly noted and approved.
Sure.
Item 12, waiving of contract SOS.
Thank you, Chairman. Me again. This is the quarterly report that's prepared by the Democratic admin team, and it relates to the waiving of contract standing orders or urgent decisions which have been taken, which don't have the opportunity for a call-in by other members. Within this report, in the last quarter, there are 2 reports. They both relate to the NNDR discretionary relief as a result of the pandemic that was in place for 2021. One relates to the hospitality side of things, and one relates to the enhanced hospitality. So an urgent decision has been taken by the leader of the council in both cases, 2 separate reports, and then I'm asked to comment on whether there's justification for that urgent decision being taken. So my comments are on the right hand side of the table on page 187. The papers are attached for information, Chairman, but the summary is that the first report didn't specifically say why an urgent decision had to be made, but within the appendix of that report, the information came through from Welsh Government that the government minister made the decision on the 3rd of March 2021, and this information needs to be in NNDR and council tax papers that go out prior to 1st of April. So that information was in the appendix, and it was urgent because Welsh Government made a late decision. But what I've subsequently identified is when that email was sent through to the organisation, and we, as Newport City Council, received that email from Welsh Government on the 16th of March. Therefore, to get the paperwork completed and sent out by the 1st of April, an urgent decision had to be made, and therefore I'm saying that's an appropriate justification. And likewise for the second report, there's no appendix within that. Sorry, the appendix says the same thing, and I've got the subsequent email which we received on the 16th of March saying that the decision needed to be made for NNDR discretionary relief, and therefore I'm saying there's appropriate justification for the urgent decision. So I don't think there's any cause for concern there, Chairman, unless members have any other questions.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Any questions from anyone? No? Okay, so we duly noted comments and recognise there's no areas of concern there. Thanks, Andrew. So we've got the next item, which is item 13, the draft work programme. Just going through it page by page as the forward look for our work programme. What I would say is that there's a couple of lines there that are being duplicated, I think. So if I look at July 29th, for example, we've got a statement of accounts, then we've got the draft financial accounts. I'm just wondering if somebody can go through and just cleanse the document a little bit to make sure that we're not incorrectly labelling some of the headings. So with that in mind, is anyone going to lead on the paper? Anne or Andrew?
Thanks, Chairman. Just to say that we will work together in the background, myself, Mark, and Anne and Pam, to update it and to make sure, and we iron out any duplications, Jim.
Okay, thanks for that. If there's no questions, we'll therefore move on to the next item in private session. So Anne, I don't know if you're there, Anne, do we close this live session now?
Yes, the live session will end now. I'll confirm once it's ended, but I'll be ending now.
Okay, thanks.